Thank you very much for inviting me. It is wonderful to see you again and see familiar faces. And I really appreciate your comments as well about collaboration. I think that's really what my talk will be about. So in my brief talk, I really want to reflect on what has been happening most recently, but to also tell you a little bit about the experience in Australia and in some of the other parts of the world that I know of. So before COVID-19, we in Australia had a number of centres that were slowly progressing the field, and some more rapidly progressing the field of telerehabilitation. In Queensland, where Annie, who is speaking next, comes from, they have a centre of research excellence in telehealth, and for some time have been working to develop telehealth and telerehabilitation systems. In Victoria, where I am from, we have a long history of developing telemedicine for acute care and have built a network of hub and spoke communication systems that allow rapid acute stroke care to occur, and that is extending in other parts of the country. Also in South Australia, there are other centres of excellence that have been developing some rehabilitation, telerehabilitation services. But by no means were we coordinated. And although there were some very good examples, it certainly was not a practice that was common in our world. As soon as COVID struck, we immediately had a call for help from within our own country, and I also started getting emails from colleagues asking me if I knew of telerehabilitation services and what might be available in different parts of the world. And that made you realise that even in our own country we had not perhaps been collaborating enough, and certainly we hadn't been looking broadly about the possibilities that we could find related to telerehabilitation. In saying that, it's not simple, because we know that there are many, many different types of telerehabilitation and teleservices, and I'll talk briefly about that. But if we look now on Twitter and put in the hashtag telerehabilitation, it gives you a very good sense of the urgency with which people have started to look at telerehabilitation. And this is in response to the fact that when COVID struck, many of our systems of care were disrupted. Rehabilitation care, especially for people with stroke, which is my area of expertise, were significantly disrupted, and we could not deliver face-to-face follow-up care for our patients in many places. So in Australia, we had an immediate and urgent feeling that we needed to look at what was available. So the first thing that we did was, together with our National Stroke Support Organisation, the Stroke Foundation, we pulled together a repository of resources that were related to delivery of telehealth and telerehabilitation. And this is now located on our Stroke Foundation's website, Inform Me. So to give you some examples, on the right-hand side of the screen, you will see that there is some guidelines around how you might deliver telehealth, some information about what it is, some policy information, information from different parts of the country, and then some examples of services that are available and toolkits, etc. And Annie will talk more about other areas in her talk. So we did this very fast. Within weeks, we had pulled together this repository so that people could go to one place and try and learn about telerehabilitation. But it's very different to think about having information and to actually practice tele-rehabilitation. And I also think it's important for us to distinguish between tele-training or tele-practice versus teleconsultation. Teleconsultation, where we may coach or advise or assess, is probably the simpler form of telehealth, and the more complex form is trying to convey and help people train via a telesystem as part of their rehabilitation. So when we thought about that, it became clear that it would be helpful in our context to create a community of practice. And so through the Centre of Research Excellence in Stroke Recovery, and led by Dominique Cadillac and Coralie English, we started to pull together a national collaboration that was to form to help build this community of practice and to share information. And so we were hoping that we would end up with a much more connected and distributed group of people. So our intent for this Australian telehealth community of practice is that it's a forum for clinicians and researchers working in stroke rehabilitation and recovery and long-term management to come together. They can have a secure communication channel for collaboration. There is a strong emphasis on sharing resources, experience, skills and knowledge. And we want to build capability through mentoring as well as developing training tools. So we have terms of reference which have been created. We now have a Microsoft Teams communication board. We've had a number of meetings now. We are using the Zoom platform as part of our communication system. And we've been very clear that we want this to be inclusive, respectful, confidential, open sharing and collaboration. So far we have 382 members who have signed up, and while many of them are from Australia, we've also had quite a number from New Zealand, from England, Ireland, the USA, Europe, Asia, India, South Africa, etc. And I think what it tells you is that there is this urgent and deep interest now in telerehabilitation. So at the moment we have a number of research pillars or interest groups, I should say, which are around communication and swallowing, neuropsychology, memory and cognition, physical and sensory functioning, secondary prevention and medical support, and general telehealth, including issues of billing, because we need to find mechanisms that are sustainable for telehealth beyond this crisis, so that it becomes something much more normal that we deliver. So before COVID, we had a bit. Now we have a lot of people interested in the area, and certainly in our field, you will also see rapid communications such as this one, which is in BMJ Global Health, which describes the many different changes that have occurred in rehabilitation services with COVID and the challenges and opportunities that we currently have to really try and build innovation into our rehabilitation services. So the World Stroke Organisation recognised this important global phenomenon, and their first webinar was talking about stroke telemedicine, which covered both acute care and the rehabilitation and post-acute care. And that webinar is available. It's very interesting for people who are very keen on the acute component. And Dominique, I've already shared some of the information from Dominique. But I wanted to pull up this as well, which I thought was very interesting. This came from Paddy Lindsay's talk, which is the Canadian Telehealth Toolkit. And this was updated just in May 2020 because of COVID. And they have created quite a nice roadmap for considering many different issues for the ongoing and structured development of telerehabilitation capabilities within a country. And I think that this is certainly something worth reading. It doesn't just address rehabilitation, but it certainly does have one component that is looking at rehabilitation and home care. This is an example of one of the checklists that they have available, and it goes on for many pages, but it talks about the administrative structure, privacy issues, how you start up a call, how you prepare individuals. And I think if you look at the right-hand side of the screen, it has those components about, for the individual at home, their family and caregivers, how do we help them get set up for telerehabilitation? So I think this is a nice toolkit for people who are interested. In the UK, they had a similar response to us, and they created a repository of resources for certain aspects of telerehabilitation. And you can see here that there are a number of different tools that they provide. Now, I'm very much aware that in Chile there has been a lot of rehabilitation and telerehabilitation going on, and I applaud you for those efforts. I am also aware that in Spain there is some significant networks. I wasn't able to get the information from them before this presentation. But I did want to raise just one thing before I close. This is just a short overview talk, and that is, of course, that not all telerehabilitation is created equal. Now, there is a recent Cochrane review that was done looking at the evidence base for telerehabilitation, but it only included in this review 22 randomised controlled trials of telerehabilitation. But what I mean when I'm talking about not created equal is just that we need to be very conscious of not just picking things up quickly now, but to really evaluate the quality of those services and how they respond to our patients' needs. So I think our future challenges are maintaining momentum and services after COVID. I know in Australia we have had some promising moves for getting sustainable funding for some telerehabilitation, but by no means are we in a position where we will be able to continue this easily after the pandemic has settled. We need early education of clinicians in telesystems, and that needs to start when they're undergraduates, learning about how to deliver and getting comfortable with these systems, because I think it's strange for the patients and it's strange for clinicians to practice in this way. So anything we can do to help people get ready is fantastic. And of course, probably in the pandemic, we've had some systems be implemented that have not really addressed the patient privacy issue and good connected and protected systems. So I think we need ways of sorting the good from the average, and also being able to not lock into systems that in future will become redundant. That is also one of the other challenges. So just going to close by saying, if anyone is interested in joining our telepractice group, then the information will be available on this video afterwards. And I just want to thank you again for inviting me. Thank you.